We were talking a bit before, and then some stuff happened, and Spacepan said he wanted to explain what's going on.
We're here with Alison Tieman, the notorious, dangerous Canadian, who thankfully, she's barred from entering America for 5 years. So we're safe for at least 5 years.
Yeah, you're safe from the most dangerous woman in the world. All you true. Americans.
Very dangerous. So we've actually tried to do this stream a few times, but I've had a couple of technical hiccups. It sounds like Prince, though, had recorded some of it, so we'll splice that probably onto the beginning of this after it goes live. But
if it's even any good, it was mostly me just like babbling.
Well, I can.
But there was a good introduction from Alison. She explained a little bit about her recent ongoings and things like that.
And now that I think about it, I have this feeling that most of you guys tune in for me babbling because that's like a whole lot of this. It's these streams. So, sorry. What were you gonna say, Alison?
Oh no, I'm just I'm waiting to figure out what the next topic is.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what I wanted to talk about? I think that we should veer towards actually talking about male issues, because that's the one thing that we haven't done in all of our puttering around. And so here's the deal. I have recently decided that I'm going to be an intactivist, and I am uncut, so this is like one of these kind of rare-ish things that happens, minus the fact that, you know, like I'm an MRA, but most intactivists are cut, and it's this, you know, I just watched American Circumcision, and it changed my life, and there was somebody in that he's like, well, the thing about intactivists is that this is a group that is all united by tragedy. We've all come together because something horrible happened to us or a loved one. And I'm like, you know, if I showed up, I would be like the only one that didn't really have that happen to me. You know, like it's more like I became an MRA just because I got really, really, really sick of feminists, and I finally started looking into, you know, like, well, what actually, you know, like, aside from feminists being annoying, what systemic disadvantages do males have? And then I was like, oh, God, I gotta be this. And so then eventually, when I actually really, really looked at intactivism stuff, I realized that it's a very, very undeniable thing. So, I feel like I could be one of these positive guys. And it's actually what was nice about it was like a revelation to me, because living in the Pacific Northwest, which is, you know, maybe the most feminist place in the United States, and maybe rivaling some places in the more feminist parts of Canada in terms of just the culture, it's really bad here. In terms of my surroundings and the people that I know, my extended social media friend group, which is people who identified as queer back when I hung out with them, you know, 7 or 8 years ago. And now they're all intersectional drones, you know, like they're like, oh, we're so non-binary. I am sort of forced to be closeted in my daily life. Not really closeted, like I tell people when I come across them, but I don't ever hang out with my old friends. Like, I just don't. And sometimes I do, and then something, you know, like I drop my guard down. Like I went to 2 friends with my party over last winter, and the first one went fine enough. The second one, I totally ended up yelling at a fucking feminist at like 4 a.m. because she was trying to talk about school shootings and was just talking nonsense. And it was actually probably would have been kind of funny to you guys, because she basically, I was like trying to be like, you know, honestly, the only way that you can really, with this issue in the United States, because there's you know what, I'm not going to enact it because I'm telling a story. I'm getting distracted. So, what I'm talking about is my intactivism. I ended up yelling at this feminist. So I was like, I can't go to parties with this friend anymore. She knows of lots of parties. I run into people that I've met before, and a lot of them like me, and I actually make new Facebook friends, and I could theoretically hang out with those. I get along with people, but I just can't do it. It's not right. But what I realized about intactivism is that this is something that I can bring to the real world, because it's so undeniable and so universal, and there's no actual reason why feminists should be against this. And if they are, they're truly, truly evil people. But it wouldn't be hard to make that clear. Like, if you were doing an intactivist demonstration in an urban downtown area, and some woman came up and was like, how dare you, people would be like, whoa, she's crazy. You know what I mean? So that being said, it was nice to find something that could actually match my my life in terms of my IRL life. And so this is where it comes in with my mother. My mother lives in this hippie far leftist community. It's like this co-housing community thing. And my mother was a hippie in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, last decade. Technically still probably kind of is, but she's also really into Jordan Peterson. It's just how my mom is, because I guess just because I showed him to her and then she got his book. And she was actually surprised to find out that the left hates him. I just told him the other night when I went over for showing her American Circumcision. But I realized that I want to actually take intactivism to real life and actually get behind it and actually do something with it, because it would make me feel spiritually whole. Like, this being a men's rights advocate is such a big part of my life, and yet I don't, it's like there's a disconnect with me in real life. So I was like, wait, but I can do that with intactivism. And so I realized, like, well, where do I start? And then I thought, feminists in the Northwest, like, they're not like avid feminists, because then they would never get along with each other, because there's a lot of them. Feminists don't get along with anyone. And so I realized that if I could show the community this movie and then talk some about it, that would be a good place to start, and maybe come up with some little plans on making our own little demonstration or something like that. And so I talked to my mom about it, and I was worried about how the community would react. And then my mom got kind of worried, and we got this big fight over it, but it was really just an email miscommunication that we managed to actually work out, which was good. So I went over, showed it to her, and totally seemed to kind of red pill her about the issue. And she's really into it. And of course, she's very inspired by the woman that was sort of the original intactivist. And she thinks she's really great. I knew that the fact that there's so many females in the movie would be very effective on my mom, because my mom is like the white savior queen of the world. Like, that is totally her archetype. And I am very happy about that. So that is a subject that I kind of want to bring up.
Okay. Well, how did it go with your mother?
Well, it went really well. So when I was talking to her in the on email, she showed hesitance to watch this with the community, and I started getting worried about why. And I thought that maybe it was because she just is against MRA stuff or whatever, because I felt this is the most universal thing. But it turned out that it was really just that she wasn't sure how many of the boys in the community have been circumcised, because there's a number of young boys. There's like 15 or 16 male children and like 2 girls. but then she went and she looked it up and found out that we're in Washington State. Washington State is one of the lowest rates of circumcision in the nation. It's only 10%. So yeah, it's actually kind of a cool thing. And then she started getting more hopeful, and so I guess that, you know, like, my point of bringing this up, I don't really I would appreciate feedback, and I would appreciate, maybe this can veer towards a discussion of, like, what are the better issues to bring up to people who are good people, who are on the fence, and who or are just not really that aware. Because I'm thinking that with, like, my kind of hippie, older environment with a lot of children, it's circumcision, genital mutilation, infant male genital mutilation. I feel like that is the red pill that goes down first. And I think that it's a good exercise to think really, really long and hard. You know, there's the things that we're most passionate about, and then there's the things that are going to work on the people around us. And, you know, no matter how much we would like it if people gave a crap about these really important things, most people don't, and they need that one issue that affects them. So if you could talk about, well, you know, they've actually tried, I think that Spacepan, wasn't there a case in Chicago where a infant female genital mutilation was ruled?
No, that was I think it was actually in Michigan.
Okay.
That was a recent case earlier this year where there was like a Muslim community that was doing a form of female cutting, and then it went to, like, the courts, and the courts, they said, well, you know, this law that would prohibit it, you know, it's technically, like, illegal. It doesn't really hold up, and that's, you know, because they had set up the law in such a way to only protect females. So at least that's my understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to note, though, is as far as, like, getting started doing activist things, like, I went to one protest, which was one that was through somebody who was working with bloodstained men, which I didn't realize at the time. We were just, like, Facebook friends, and they messaged, like, hey, there's going to be a protest, and there was like a big football game we were having. So it was, like, the coldest day of that year up in Minnesota. And there were 5 of us who all went, and he had a whole bunch of different signs and everything he had printed off, and all of that you can just get off of the Bloodstained Men's website.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's another thing people think about too, is, like, what's the best way to approach intactivism, right? Because you know, there's intactivism where, you know, you're trying to just kind of spread awareness, and some people try to, like, not be too judgmental and to kind of have, like, a softer approach to it. And then there's what I call attactivism, where you really just kind of, you know, you don't sugarcoat anything. And I think that really there's a place for all of those approches.
Oh my god, it just occurred to me that I never sent out a link to the stream on any of my social media. Sorry. Okay.
Well, so if you want to go ahead and do that, what I guess what I'd be interested to hear from Alison is kind of what you think about.
I can't do it though because I'm screen sharing my. I guess I can just do it anyway. Okay, yeah, keep talking. Sorry.
Just so what you think about kind of this idea that like a lot of people will say that if you go to social media and you're like too abrasive, that ultimately you could like hurt the movement. And I think that's a concern that a lot of people like within the manosphere, within like the men's rights movement have is you know, that obviously a lot of these issues people are very angry about them. And I guess I'm wondering, is there a place for tone policing? Like how do you like what do you think is an appropriate way to deal with that conflict between trying to be kind of open to everything and very like politically correct and having a way that's kind of what I call pink pilled, right? The sugar coated red pill versus kind of just telling it how it is and being more abrasive.
Well, I mean, if you look at my Twitter, I can't say that I'm not abrasive. Every approach is valid except being stupid. And what I mean by that is don't get baited into rage if it's an argument that requires intelligent analysis or supporting material, and be ready, be prepared to explain what your conclusions. And I have never really sugarcoated anything in when I do it, although I will in certain cases try to approach people from where they are. So try to make a connection with where they are, and try to move, or not even move, but just see where they are, and see if I can convince, talk to them about where I am, and see if there's any way to bridge the gap. I'm not sure if I can really articulate how to approach it. Personally, I wouldn't tone police anyone. People have their different styles. Every style has its own appropriate situation. I think that in some cases, some arguments are just dumb and they don't work. So I would say, yeah, don't make those arguments. Yeah. So other than that, and like, do you want to talk about specific instances of how to approach maybe finding a common ground? Would that be something to do? Because I really like. I think everyone has their own style, and I think it all is important in its own way. Some people are more angry because these issues incite a lot of anger, and that's fine. I wouldn't tell them not to be angry when that's what they feel. And some people want to have more of a soft approach, and some people want to. When I was in CAFE, that's Canadian Association for Equality's Canadian Men's Issues Conference, and that was called Momentum, and it was in August as well. I heard Cassie J speak, and she talked briefly about what really got her to turn around on the issue of feminism and men's rights. And what got her to turn around was she spent a large amount of time bonding with Erin Pizzey over a mutual concern for female victims of domestic violence. And then from there, she started to open up more around the issues of male victims of domestic violence. And then from there, around male victims of other things, like genital mutilation, like parental alienation, like sexual assault. So sometimes if you really feel like somebody is open, you might give them something to consider. Now, my approach is probably a lot more aggressive than Cassie's ended up being. I often see where people have a sense of cognitive dissonance, and I bring them to that point, and I call it the they won't answer a question game. So you get to the point where they can't answer a clear question about their own belief, and then you just leave them hanging with that question. You just walk away, because that's the last thing that what happens when you get into an argument is that both sides are reinforcing their already existing beliefs. So if you end on an assertion about your already existing belief, that assertion is only going to reinforce their already existing belief. That's why they go on Twitter and argue.
Yeah.
It's because they want to reinforce their beliefs, not because they want to question them. But if you end your interaction with a question and then walk away, they walk away with the question. And that's, to me, that's worth doing. And I think over time, a few people have actually, I may have red pilled a few people like that, because if they have only the question to contend with, then they're basically arguing with themselves, even subconsciously. And I've noticed sometimes when I do that, the same person will come back later, and the answer to the question will suddenly have become their own decision. And the answer to the question will have been what I was sort of leading them to.
So yeah. I do that too. I totally do that too all the time. One of the things, and I actually just had a conversation about this, is, people say, there's never any reason to argue on the internet. It doesn't actually change people's minds. And that is what most people think. I think 95% of people believe that. It doesn't really stop most people from doing it, at least sometimes, but they all sort of claim to think that. And I am an avid internet debater. The reason that I can simply state why I am is because the times in my life where I've really deeply changed about, you know, my cognitive processes and how I cerebrally viewed the world and saw the world. It was after an internet debate that I basically lost. You know, that somebody stumped me and they had me on something, and then I walked away from that and I processed it and I processed it and I changed as a person. And so what I tell people is that, you know, yeah, it works all the time. You know that somebody is engaged if they're writing long things and they keep going and they keep going. And then you get to this certain point where it's like you tired them out or something and then they just kind of stop. And I think really very often they walk away from that and they have a big change. But I would say, you know, 99 times out of 100, you're never going to get any direct satisfaction that you were the one that made that change in them. They're never going to come back and say, oh, yeah, you know, like, I'm so glad I met you.
They'll push you to the end of the earth.
Wait. I have a funny thing to say about that hating to the end of the earth thing. So I had the opportunity when I was a raver. So many of these people, when I used to do that on this like electronic music message board in the mid 2000s, I would have so many experiences like that because these people just weren't used to gay people. They were like ravers that were from, you know, kind of like rural, small town of the Northwest, and this was when those people had just never met gay people, and they were starting to because of raves and being able to communicate with us on the internet. And I just pretty good at debating, so I would meet these people and they would be like, blah, 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 blah. I think you choose to be gay. It's still a lifestyle choice. And I'm like, well, I didn't. And then, you know, like I remember this one guy specifically, and I was like, well, wait, what if I did choose? Like, what if somebody, like, I don't think that I did choose to be gay, but what if somebody did? Actually, and that made me really think about it. And I don't know if it was this guy, but there was like 6 or 7 people at least that wanted to go out to beers with me as a result of those things. But I was such a little early 20s hipster asshole that I'd be like, are you kidding? You were such an asshole for like 3 months. I'm never having a beer with you. So that was my immature response. Don't do that, because I had the opportunity with one of those people that would hate you for all of eternity. They were ready not to, and I blew it. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never had that situation where when I've sort of walked away, just let the question hang and then walk away, and that seems to be critical. Sometimes I will argue up to the point where I realize there's no point further. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times you talk about tone policing, but in my opinion, when I get into an argument, I'm always prepared to change my mind. Mm-hmm. So I'm always prepared to have information that I didn't know before I got into the argument. Now, I'll have to confess that in general, feminists have never changed my mind about anything. And this has been sort of the story of my engagement with them since like 2003 or even earlier, 2002, possibly even earlier than that.
And if it ever comes close, you're always like, where was the lie? I know they must have told me a lie. I'm gonna find it.
Well, I don't. I'm like, usually I listen to them and I'm like, well, have you considered this? And they haven't. Mm-hmm. And then they get upset with me. And then I'm like, well, your insults, your extortion, and your threats are not going to make me convinced of your reality. It's just not going to happen with me. So usually what happens is that they will present something and I can find something that they have not considered. And it's obvious that they have not considered it because the instant I bring it up, they start with the threats or the harassment or the insults or the extortion. And so, and that has been the case for almost 2 decades now. And all I'm asking for is a sensible argument that includes all of the evidence. It doesn't exclude any of it. And so far I have been left high and dry in that particular instance. But what I wanted to get at with that is it's not about tone policing. It's about taking your approach and making sure that you always come to every engagement with a mindset of being willing to learn. You don't always have to agree with the person you're arguing with, but in the process of engaging with them, you should either learn something new or you should learn how to make your arguments better. So you shouldn't go to Twitter and just be banging your head against a brick wall, because that's how you reaffirm your own bias.
Yeah.
If you're not changing, you're not doing anything. So I've always come to these arguments with the mindset, well, what can I learn from this? And like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'll agree with the person I'm arguing with, but I will learn either a new way of explaining myself or a new way of explaining my ideas, or maybe I'll learn something new from them, which is a very refreshing thing that has happened after the border crossing incident where I was turned back by the U.S.
Yeah.
And I now actually have an opening salvo with the left. It's something that I can sympathize with them on, which is I do not think that Trump's border policies are sensible. At least not when it comes to what's happening with the Canadian-U.S. border. And I can't honestly say that they are anymore. I know this might anger some people, but my experience is such that I cannot honestly get behind this, and I don't think it's beneficial to the American economy or the American people. Now, the other thing is, and this is something that I've noticed recently, is I was banned from the U.S. for 5 years for attempting to bring business into the U.S. economy. Yeah. And while I was going through that process, the border agents asked me, well, is there any reason why you might be afraid to go back to your own country? Now, there's recently another individual who I know who is, and it's totally legitimate, she is fleeing persecution as an atheist from a theocracy that violently enforces a particular, religious viewpoint. But she's not going to the U.S. to bring business or jobs. She's going to the U.S. and she's going to need assistance. She most likely is going to need either employment assistance, and I'm not saying that she wants to be unemployed, but she comes from a culture where she hasn't necessarily got the skills to be part of the job market. But the U.S. will roll out the red carpet, and I'm not saying that's wrong, because you want to be the kind of place that takes in people who are running away from genuine persecution from their countries. But to turn away somebody who's bringing jobs and money and accept someone who's going to be a net deficit, and the Republicans haven't changed this. They also believe that women who in trouble should be saved. They haven't changed this. So you're bringing women like this in, and you're excluding women who are actually going to strengthen your economy and your job market. And over time, that's going to have an effect. And I don't think this is a sensible policy. And I'm not saying that you necessarily should exclude the women who need your help, but I'm also saying that maybe you should reconsider where you're drawing the balance here, because it seems really unbalanced right now. And I don't see the Republicans actually correcting it. So that's...
Oh, no.
They're deify female victimhood too. But that has become one of my ins with the left, because I have a genuine criticism of Trump. So I can go up to them and I can say, well, this is a problem that I have with him. And they can let their guard down a bit. And like I said, I went to my leftist friend who I spoke with, and this is for those of you who just tuned in, we had an extended conversation about the border incident, and the fact is that after it happened, I went back and I talked to one of my more left-leaning friends who works in Homeland Security to sort of get an idea of what was going on, and he pointed me in the right direction to find out the information I needed to find out. And they have legitimate criticism of what Trump is doing with the border, what the Republicans are doing with the border. Now, I would say that while their criticism is legitimate, I think that a lot of how they're going about voicing their criticism is illegitimate. But the reason why I think that's happening is because both sides aren't seeing each other anymore. And I would point my finger firmly at the media for that. Because the legitimate criticism of Trump isn't getting through.
Yeah.
Like the only thing I hear when I went after all of this at the border, I'm like, wow, this is really crazy. Why isn't this being talked about? And I turn on the media, and what they had chosen to report on that day about Trump was him having fixed a weather map with a Sharpie. And I'm like, this is disgusting, and you're insulting my intelligence. And
yeah, or you could like agree with one of these people and be like, yeah, I actually, like you could, I don't know if you would show up to a rally, but let's say that you were on a subway car with one of these people or a group of them, and they're talking really, really loud about, some sort of like border activism or something, and maybe they called on you, maybe they wanted you to talk, and so you were like, oh, well, I was actually held up in the border and banned for 5 years. Like, I'm going to imagine you're in Toronto, okay? I'm having to make lots of annotations here. Like I was actually held up at the border and banned from the United States for 5 years. And they might get mad at you because you're white and be like, well, you weren't put in a cage. Like the level of inability to have any discourse, even if you agree with them about some things. It's like, they're like, oh, I don't know, it sounds like you're a liberal, and you know what happens to them, you know what they get. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree, but like I was saying at the beginning, I think Peterson is right that the balance, and there's no dialogue, and as long as the dialogue doesn't happen, you won't get a good balance and a good understanding of where to draw the line at the border, how porous and how porous it should be, or how firm it should be, until you stop this cold civil war between left and right and actually have a real conversation. And I totally agree that the left is definitely fired the first shot in all of this.
Yeah.
But at some point you got to ask yourself, is it worth losing what we have in the West to be right about, to make the left eat its own words? Yeah. Like you said, it's a situation where you can get people to think, or you can get people to think and agree with you if you don't ask them to thank you for it. Yeah. You know what I mean? If you put the question out there and let it be their own decision to come to. And with the left, like when I went through that experience and I started to talk to the left again, I realized some things that there, as much as the left's opinions about the right are distorted, I think the right's opinions about the left are distorted as well. Mm-hmm. For example, I started to listen more to what the Marxists and the communists the young men who were Marxists and communists were actually saying about why they wanted to be Marxists and communists. And what I found out, and I'm going to preface this by saying that I am an ANCAP, that means an anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah, so Spacepan's an ANCAP, so... Yeah,
so I definitely don't agree with their solution to their problem. Mm. But unlike what the right says, what they really want is a purpose, and they want a job. They don't want a handout. They want somebody to give them a sense of purpose, because they don't feel like they're getting it from this society, or they don't know where to get it from this society. Yeah. So it's like when you read that, you're like, well, that's very sympathetic, and it's also like the right is incorrect about where this. I don't know, with Marxist or communist women, it's entirely possible that they just want a handout, because that seems to be a thing that women like. But with the men, they want a purpose. Yeah. And they think communism is going to give them that purpose. And it's like, I don't believe it will, but at the same time, it's wrong to say that they're doing it because they want a handout. Huh. And if you insist in saying that they're just doing it because they want a handout, I can see why they get more and more pissed off and more entrenched in their own beliefs. Because you are not listening to them, and you're not listening to what they actually want. You're just using the most convenient smear to ignore what's going on with them. In my opinion, this goes right back to feminism and the politics between men and women. The reason why these young men don't have a sense of purpose is because there Like the entire concept of a young man being mentored by an older man to start his first job, to develop his first his first ability to take a job and keep it and work hard and be conscientious. That's all gone because it's the old boys network, right?
Yeah.
So there's no fraternity between men in terms of the work world anymore.
Yeah.
And when you lose that, you have a whole bunch of young men who are wandering around, don't know how to become productive, and they think communism can be that mentor for them. And that's what's motivating them. And if you insist on seeing them as being freeloaders who want a free lunch, you will never be able to convince them. You won't be able to convince them of a single thing because you start off lying about them. And this is the kind of stuff that I've been seeing as I go forward.
I have a real quick question. Where are these men located that you've been communicating with?
Twitter. And the thing is that I am not like they would probably regard me as continuing to be their enemy. So it's like I remember the last couple exchanges I had with them.
And how many are there?
I think a couple, like over the course, I think about 6 that would actually talk to me about what is going on in their mind. Like, I don't know any wide-scale research on this issue except for one thing that I came across with Antifa, a study that may be indicating that Antifa is a reproductive strategy by young men, very similar to what happens in the ghetto, and might actually be a symptom of that creeping single motherhood creeping into the white community. What's happening with Antifa is that they're using violence as a way to improve their reproductive strategies, like young men often use in a situation like poorer neighborhoods or ghetto communities with gang violence. And it is statistically young men who are willing to engage in that kind of violence do improve their reproductive potential. And so the study talked about how Antifa may be trying to, like these young men who get into this Antifa and the violence, may be trying to be literally, they are motivated by some of the most fundamental aspects of being a young man, which is just to improve their reproductive potential, find a purpose, be part of some kind of society. So this whole thing might just be a reflection of the increasing rate of single motherhood in the white community, and the white community going down the same road as the gang and tribalist violence in the black community and the poorer communities. So it's like that. Now the thing about the young communist men is I have talked to a few. I do not know a study about their motivations, but as far as I can tell, when I do talk to them, this is what they talk about. Now they don't think I'm a friend at all.
Yeah.
They usually I listen to them and I sort of ask them questions, and they think me listening to them and asking them questions is me losing the debate. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. But so the individuals I'm talking about are not like, they're not my friends.
Yeah. And
they would not consider themselves my friends. But I do notice that what they're saying is not what the right thinks about them.
Yeah. Well, I had a relationship, online relationship with a young communist who lives in Chicago, and he's black. He's probably maybe, I don't know, 21, 22 now or something. And I talked to him one year, and then the next year, I think that I blocked him because he was saying some stuff that, like, he was just like obsessively, and I don't think I knew about the mute function, or maybe they didn't have it. And he was just obsessively commenting on everything that I tweeted, and he was just saying stuff that he didn't know anything about. Like, we'd be talking about things that he hadn't read, like the James Damore memo and stuff, and I was like, okay, I can't stand this anymore. But when I the first year I talked to him on a live stream, and we talked for a long time, like hours, and then the next year we talked a lot, and I mean, I was surprised by how much there was to him, because the most of the Antifa people that I've known IRL are really just like hipster punk rock people that usually have drug problems, and but he was really into stuff, and really read a lot, and like by the next year he had read a whole lot of Marx and other Marxist type scholars. Now, granted, somehow he had turned into a Stalinist. And that was really strange. But yeah, I was surprised by how much there was to it from his perspective. I just don't think that there was anything valid to his conclusions at all in any way. But you're right. He did have this feeling of hopelessness. He did have that. He said that, he's basically doomed. And because I told him, I was like, God, I can't believe somebody convinced you to be so defeated in life and feel like you have no future. And he was like, I didn't need anyone to teach me that. And I was like, oh.
Well, and that's the thing, the whole conversation, Alison, as you're kind of describing Marxists and trying to sympathize with their perspective, it reminds me of the way that a lot of people within the men's rights movement talk about incels, right? Is we say, look, like, obviously there's a problem here, obviously they're having some sort of issue, and like generally we don't really think that that's the answer, that they should have that sort of an outlook. But at the same time, you can kind of sympathize with why, things as they are. You're having this growing phenomenon of people who are, the incels are displaced from the sexual market, whereas these Marxists are displaced from the labor market. And I think that the parallels are actually, it's kind of creepy how well I think that lines up. Marxists are basically just incels in regard to employment.
Yeah, they are incels in regard to, and because employment is so closely tied with reproductive success, they're basically incels, but they've latched on to the idea that communism is somehow going to make it all work for them. Whereas incels just latch on to the idea that, I don't know, women are, well, I mean, in some ways women are sort of the solution to their problem. But that, I don't even know if they have an ideology aside from.
I don't think that they really do. I think it's more of a very, very, very loose support network. And
there is some.
Oh, okay.
Having to do with like bone structures, jawlines. They have stuff like that. They have theories about what women like, and that there's kind of this archetype, and that.
Oh, is that where the Chad comes from?
Yeah, to some degrry, yeah. So that's kind of an idea behind it, but
Yeah, but isn't it interesting?
well, the irony though is that the reason that we have so many so few opportunities in terms of employment is because of all these leftist policies. It's because we have a minimum wage. It's because we have all of these workplace standards and things like that. If we were to just get rid of all that, it'd be really easy to find mentorships and
they would say, and in turn they would say, if you liberalize the borders, they would be more cross-border trade and more cross-border business. So, and they would have a point. Like the closing off the borders is sort of its own kind of form of socialism, where you're turning the entire U.S. into a union. But I think honestly, they would have, definitely, from my experience, they would have a point to that. When you close off the border, you close off the economic opportunity. Even the protectionists who believe in closing the border recognize that you are going to, over time, reduce the strength of the American economy by trying to divide it off from the global economy. So the left would very rightly point out that, you are going to be reducing the economic output by doing this. Mm-hmm. And again, it comes to the whole idea that the conversation needs to happen so that the as Jordan Peterson says, the line is drawn in a sensible way. And where the line should be is drawn in a sensible way. The only way you're going to get that is if you have a good, strong conversation between left and right over how it should be approached. But and what I wanted to point out with that is, I think a lot of these young men who are very much obsessed with particular ideologies, like communism, even white nationalism, and this idea that, black men or brown men are taking white women away. I think a lot of these ideologies are driven by these young men's wish to be productive and to improve their reproductive opportunities. That includes and other ideologies like that. And also incels apparently have their own particular conception of what will get them more reproductive opportunities. But what really fascinates me about all this is how much it is driven by the dynamic between the genders and the instincts that men and women have, and how little awareness that they have not escaped their sexual instincts the left often has.
Yeah.
Because they pride themselves on being these elevated, elite, gender neutral or gender haven't levitated above your base instincts. In fact, all that's happened is you basically ignore the fact that you have them. Therefore, you're even more beholden to them.
It actually.
So anyway,
it's reminding me of the season of South Park with PC Principal.
Yeah.
At least the first one where he came in and they were doing the mandatory the affirmative consent forms at the frat house, and they're all like, "Oh, did one of you not, like supposedly we got a complaint that one of our frat brothers raped some woman?" And they're like, "Do you all have the forms that said that she was willing to for you to smash her pussy?" And they're all like, "Yeah, she totally says she let me smash her pussy," and blah blah blah. It seems a lot more funny at the time. I realize you guys aren't cracking up.
No, it's the dread cost of retelling a joke.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work.
No, I didn't think that you guys were gonna like laugh hysterically, but do you see the point mostly?
Yeah.
Well, it's like a top-down restructuring of gender relations that's just like so like inorganic and like just artificial and stupid.
But the problem is that it is restructuring of gender relations, but it's not actually creating equality.
Sorry, even more removed than the affirmative consent forms. Like it's gotten to this like so abstracted that it's like an entire economic restructuring, which is ultimately motivated by biological urges.
Yeah, it is. And because they have this sort of cult of gender neutrality, what ends up happening is that because they can't recognize them, they're just completely driven by them. It's funny to watch. And that's actually one of the approaches that I bring to talking to these people, to these individuals who espouse like feminist gender stuff, is that I tell people beforehand, let's see how long it takes before they start reducing women down to victims, because that's their gender role, really. That is their dynamic. That is, men are these uncaring brutes who have no compassion or warmth, and this you can see in the statistics now from how people have responded to surveys about men and women since 1946. In 1946, men and women were closer when it came to people perceiving men as being warm and compassionate. Now there's a huge divide with men absolutely bottoming out. Nobody's seeing them as warm and compassionate anymore, and women accelerating as being seen as way more warm and compassionate than men. Conversely, since 1946, there's been a larger divide in perception of women versus men's agency, with women reducing. So people seeing women as having less agency now than they did in 1946. And agency is your ability to make decisions, of your ability to act. And it's like, this is not creating equality. It's just creating a new form of gender role. And to be frank, it's a form of gender role that is dehumanizing for both men and women. So we haven't actually created equality. We've just dehumanized both men and women. And then we've called it gender neutrality somehow. I don't know,
Yeah, but I would push back very, very slightly about the 1946 thing, because that was during World War II, and so women were doing all of the stuff at home, so people did actually expect things from them.
Yeah, they did expect things from them, and there was a very important women's sphere that was critical for the survival of their families and their communities. And so it's likely that the perception of agency, it might not be driven by feminism. Feminism might be a symptom of the loss of perception of women's agency. So feminism gets in there and is able to operate because nobody is able to see women as being able to make decisions or act. So things like sperm banks, suppressing women by presenting women with the choice of having, alpha chads to father their children. That literally there is a paper out there, a feminist paper, that argues that a sperm bank is oppressing the choices of women by presenting them with the opportunity to have children by highly intelligent, athletic, high testosterone men. And I'm like, how is the sperm bank forcing this on women? But it's the patriarchy, you see. And this is something that 80 years ago, people might just be like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
Women can make choices, they can take action, and not just that, it's critical that they do, or we wouldn't survive. But now it's just like you say that and people just lap it up. They're like, yes, of course women don't have control over their own thoughts and minds. Because they just don't. It's just they don't. And the ultimate end game of this particular gender inequality that feminists promote is to literally see women as simply a substrate upon which men write their actions. So women don't even exist as entities at all. They basically are nothing more than a chalkboard. And it's men who are writing everything on them.
I'm not into... are you saying that's what... like if you reduce how they're actually describing women?
If you take feminist gender roles... Because what's really happened is feminism hasn't created equality.
Yeah.
It's just supplanted previous gender roles with its own gender roles. So instead of boys wearing blue and girls wearing pink, feminism has been basically said, well, action is male and inaction is female. So that's the feminist gender role. Mm-hmm. Now, what I mean by that is, men, since you can't actually take action if you're not perceived to be a moral agent. Mm-hmm. So if women are all good and they can't choose to be bad, then they cannot be perceived as moral agents. And if you can't be perceived as a moral agent, you actually can't really be perceived as taking action or making decisions at all.
So I see what you're saying. I see.
So if you take that to its logical conclusion, if you take the idea that women can't take action, they can't even control their own thoughts, they can't control their own emotions, they control nothing about their life at all, it's all controlled by the all-consuming patriarchy, take that to its logical conclusion, then women will be viewed simply as objects that are written upon by the actions of men. And that is all.
They are just the vessel for the seed. Like, isn't that what the Greeks thought? Yeah,
they're just the vessel for the seed of men's morality. Uh-huh. And they're animated solely by the seed of men's morality. And it's creepy as fuck. And it's amazing.
But it is actually rather soothing. I mean, they have no idea that they're doing that, but it's sort of a consequence. Like, feminists don't really know what their thesis is, as you can tell if you ever talk to one or try to actually read one of their feminist theory books. It's like they have no idea what they're trying to say. They're just making it up as they go along. There's entire academic fields based around that, and so the only thing that you can do is what you've just kind of done right there with logic, which is scratch everything that we know it's not off and sort of pray process of elimination. And so it's like, okay, well, what about this one thing that a woman did one time, or actually women do all the time? No, that's actually the woman doing the thing because the patriarchy made her. Okay, what about this one? What about this one? What about this one? Okay, you're basically saying that women are like dead robots that men inject life to with their sperm.
Or with their moral choices. Women are just animated by men's moral choices. Mm-hmm. So if women do something wrong, it's because they've been animated by the bad sperm of patriarchy. And if women do something right, I don't know, I guess patriarchy didn't animate them somehow. But it's not their choice to do something right. It was just that they didn't end up getting inseminated by the bad moral actions of patriarchy. At that point it starts to really break down. And I don't think
I think I can make some sense of this, because if you have like female hypoagency, right, where women aren't responsible for their choices, well, then what ends up happening is, of course, choice in general and freedom in general is going to constantly be perceived as something that's harmful or bad to women. And like this whole conversation reminds me of you guys ever watch Regarding Men, the show that Janice, Paul, and Tom do together on Studio Brew? Well, just yesterday they posted a video where they were going over a study about male versus female happiness. And in the study, they'd kind of like asked men, like, what makes them happy and gives them purpose. And there was a lot of things about it that was very like positive in regard to like male values. And one thing they had kind of kept going back to was this idea that, as women were given more and more choices, they became less and less happy, and people are
Yeah.
perceiving that, right? And it makes perfect sense that, like, you have this idea where you have this, like, like middle-aged woman who's single and childless and everything, and she built her whole life around all this feminist rhetoric, and she's constantly thinking about all of her reproductive choices and everything, and like, versus a woman who takes a more traditional route. The narrative is that the traditional woman was somehow controlled and obsessed by these patriarchal traditionalist notions, whereas it seems that it's kind of the inverse, which is a little bit ironic, that these women who bought into the rhetoric, like they're the ones who's having patriarchy live rent free in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, they're the ones who believe that somehow all of their choices are either, like, I don't know what happens with women when they make a good choice, but in the feminist rhetoric, it must be because they haven't had patriarchy isn't animating them at that moment.
Hooks to be the example of, like, what is feminism really in its current form, which is, basically the same as it's always been. But what would Bell Hooks say? Because she's the living matron saint of feminism.
She's the paragon of basic bitch feminism.
I guess, but it's like I haven't really found a feminist that doesn't revere her, so what I feel that she seems to think, and I had to deduct this from process of by process of elimination, because she it doesn't really know how to say things.
Oh, I think I figured it out. I think I figured it out, Prince.
Yeah.
I just want to interject this really quickly. When women make bad choices, they're animated by the spirit of patriarchy. When they make good choices, they're animated by the spirit of feminism, and thus must tithe to it.
Yeah.
So in no situation is a woman actually making individually her own choice.
Yes. And that's basically what I was going to say. But what I was going to say is only slightly different, which is I would add the caveat, or the slightly different spin, that all of the world is naturally feminist. And because in Bell Hooks' book, The Will to Change, Men, Love, and Masculinity, which I recommend every MRA read if they want to understand what we're up against in terms of current feminists being obsessed with trying to sniff their dirty little noses into men's business and tell us what to do all the time. It really did seemingly come from this book. Because it is worshipped by feminists, and if you tell them that you're an MRA, they'll think that, oh, well, you just haven't read this book yet, because patriarchy hurts men too, didn't you know? And this is the book that's all about it, and once you read it, you'll agree with me, and you'll hate yourself, but think that you need to be saved, and this book shows you how to save yourself, except for it doesn't actually say anything. That's sort of what they all think about this book, and the chapter 2 is on patriarchy, and the first sentence of it is patriarchy is the biggest societal sickness on the planet that has plagued humankind throughout all of history, or whatever. And so this idea, and of course the solution is always feminism, or as she calls it, feminist movement. Feminist is a verb to her, so feminist, or not maybe a verb, an adverb, or an adjective. I don't know. God, I'm bad at the names of the types of words. Sorry. But yeah, the solution is always feminist movement or feminist thought, and so it seems to be that is what it is. The natural state is feminism, and getting back to that feminism. But I think that it's like the universe only makes sense, according to her, under the paradigm that it was broken to begin with. Like, in the beginning, there was a big, vile bang, and it was a bunch of sperm. It was patriarchy. And then we started existing, and the feminism that held the universe together got further and further spread apart through space, and now we are trying to all come back together and form that big, eternal oneness of love that is feminism, which would actually be a black hole. But it's like that's how she's describing reality. Yeah.
And I'm going to have to take off here for a bit, but I want to just leave you with the thought. The thing is that anything bad it's the spirit of patriarchy animating men. It's just the internalized misogyny and the internalized patriarchy. If it's animating any individual woman, anytime she does something that the feminist hive approves of, she's of course animated by feminism. And of course she has to do what the sisterhood tells her.
Yeah.
Or it's bad. Even if it's good for her as an individual, if it's not beneficial to the sisterhood, and the sisterhood defines what is of benefit to itself, and strangely it always seems to be more political power for an elite class of women, but if she does not do that, then she's animated by patriarchy. But if she does do it, then she's animated by the spirit of feminism. And I swear to God, nobody would for a moment entertain any of this if we still had the same perception of women's agency that we did in 1946, because they'd be like, "This is nonsense." But now,
so there you have it.
Well, all the men were at war, and so they kind of had to be a little bit more practical. And actually, before you leave, I made that video called "Intersectional Feminism is Communist Particle Board," which was a research video, and we got into a little bit of a tiff talking about it on the internet. It was kind of awkward, but that was during a trying time for me. But this is interesting that you bring up that year, because the thing about that, really all of the late 30s and the 40s was, according to my research, basically the template for the feminist movement of even today, like the feminist movement of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. All of these things that they kind of came up with, they sort of came up with, the female communists that were free to lead the Communist Party while men were at war, kind of came up with all of this stuff, because they had time and, energy to really think about women's they had the agency at that time because they were kind of forced to, and they were in charge of everything. And then ever since then, it's been romanticization of this, or romanticizing, is that a better word? This era of collectivist, female-centric women who didn't even call themselves feminists. They were just female communists. But that's what became, and so, it's this strange thing. Maybe when women are forced to actually, knuckle down and really, really, really do stuff, that's this great thing in the memory of other women, except for, at the time, of course, they hate it. But I guess everyone would. So.
Well, I mean, that was not all women. That was just pretty much a privileged few.
Yeah.
Started all this. Started all of these women, more female-centric movements. But it is interesting that the women, I think, with communism are really, what they really want is a utopia where they don't have to bargain with male sexuality in order to get resources, and then the men just want a freaking purpose. And I think I don't know, I have no idea. Why is it that these women are so bothered by male sexuality? I think that's another topic for another day. It just seems really bizarre. Anyway, I'm gonna take off now. Thank you again for having me on. It was a great
thanks for coming on, and thanks for bearing with me while I was groggily fumbling around because I was not really feeling good, and I had been napping, and I was just not really paying attention. And that's okay. My apology is all about me making excuses. I apologize. Thanks for coming.
Oh, no problem. Thanks again for having me on, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, and actually, real quick, Alison, I did have that question for you that I asked you at the conference, and obviously we won't have time for it now. But one thing I want to tell anyone listening is Alison's series on threat narratives is something you should absolutely check out if you haven't yet. It's a series that every couple of years, I kind of revisit it, and I gain something new every time. And I had some thoughts about how it works with the non-aggression principle that I might bug you in messages on like Discord just to kind of pick your brain a little. But
I too have checked out at least one of your videos on the threat narrative, and it is very, very compelling topic because it's something that we rarely hear about, but shapes so much, especially how women behave online.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, another thing too. Alison's most recent video, you had shown you have some merch, some stuff to shill. So
okay,
there was the program book and some DVDs from the conference, which might be exciting for someone who wasn't able to go there, or even if you're able to go there. I thought those books were pretty cool.
Yeah, so there's pre-orders available through our website for the conference books and the DVDs, and if you're interested in that, you can go to feedthebadger.com. You might have to do some shenanigans like select, let's see, go to the store, the shop. Oh, no, everything redirects to the... you might not actually be able to get there now. But if you go to my most recent video, you should be able to get a link to the product, the DVDs, the pre-order for the DVDs, and the program guide, which was a very nice series of articles done by and about the presenters in the International Conference on Men's Issues, which was in Chicago in August. I'll give Prince the link, and maybe he can put that in the low bar. Anyway, if you're
okay.
So it's in the Skype bar there.
Yeah, actually, why don't you,
Alison,
Spaceman? Could you put that in the side chat at least?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. And then I just want to make one final note here. I know you're trying to get away, but Alison, I thought that the presentation you gave at the end of the conference was, for me, that was like the top tier best presentation of any of the speeches or panels that I saw at the entire thing. So,
well, thank you. I'm glad you appreciated it. Was there anything in particular that you liked about it, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, just because you're basing it around this idea that we have like a kind of a closed like network of people that we can deal with, and it was like with a lot of men's issues, I think people come away with it with this idea of like helplessness, this idea that like I can't possibly change all of society or change all of these issues. And what I kind of came away with was this idea that, with anybody that you interact with, you can be one of those people in their network that makes all the difference. And that, it's something that that would say often too, is that, society is operating on basically 0% care and concern and empathy for men and boys. And like, maybe getting it to 50% isn't realistic, but imagine if it was 10%, this idea that like we really have nowhere to go but forward, and there really are so many opportunities to improve things, even if it seems hopeless in the larger perspective.
Well, yeah,
I agree.
The thing is that you bring up some very deep topics like the threat narratives, and then what I think what could happen with the situation between the genders. And yeah, in that speech, I did start to talk about getting a little bit more modest in our expectations and start just helping each other, and focusing on that. It's sort of the same thing as when I talk about how when you go into a conversation, try to look at it as an opportunity to learn something. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with the person you're arguing with or debating with or having a conversation with, but just see if there's an opportunity to learn. And in this case, what's really going to distinguish, I think, what we're doing from what everyone else is doing is extending that compassion, trying to make your community a better place. And that's really what we need to focus on, in my opinion. But I'm going to take off. Like, these are great topics. They're huge. So
Well,
It'd have to be another day.
great. Thanks for coming by, and yeah, hopefully we can have another time that's a bit more of like a hangout, and not sort of weird and rushed and me feeling weird and everything.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Prince, and
Okay.
thank you, Spacepan. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So let's chat for a little bit more, and then I am actually not feeling good, so I maybe,
Oh no.
yeah, I wasn't lying.
Well, I'm feeling great.
Okay.
One thing I was gonna mention to her too is the silver lining behind Alison not being able to make it to the conference is that anytime she was like speaking to people or like giving her presentation, there was like this Zordon effect. It was like her massive, just like this like a big head speaking to everyone, which kind of felt appropriate, right? Like she's like the creator of the conference, so there's like this omnipotent feel to it.
Yeah, that's funny. What was I going to say about God, there was something and I kind of let it go in my head because I'm not really quite feeling good. No, I just don't really remember. So what else would you and I want to talk about together?
Well, I had some thoughts that had come up when we were talking about like the right attitude, you know, towards the border and towards protectionism, and it is very funny,
Oh wait,
right?
can you
Like,
talk to the and I can't actually do this through Skype, which we're on, but I need to go to the bathroom, and so could you like just entertain the chat, and I'll be back in a second.
yeah, I got a little ramble, which
Okay.
Chad, I hope you'll find it pretty interesting. So basically, before Trump, if you said that you were in favor of open borders and free trade, right? They'd say, "Oh, you're like a crazy libertarian. That's completely irrational, right?" Everybody would say that. And then the moment we have Trump, who takes up these positions basically as a reaction to what the left is doing with these, right? Well, now all of a sudden, all the leftists are suddenly they're total free market capitalists when it comes to when it comes to open borders and free trade, right? Like now they're just making all those arguments, and it is very funny, right? That to see like Marxists arguing like, oh well, if we get rid of borders, then we'll have more opportunities for people because it's going to stimulate the economy, and they'll make all the same kinds of arguments that like a laissez-faire capitalist would make, which to me, yeah, it just shows that like everybody is truly secretly a libertarian. Everybody is truly secretly a capitalist. It's just everyone's a liar too, and they're just going to pretend that they don't actually think this. And it's just like how if you say, oh, we need to get rid of the FDA, we need to get rid of government regulation of businesses, like they'll literally tell you point blank, like, no, like if I go to a restaurant, what's to stop them from just poisoning everyone, right? Oh, we couldn't possibly have a service like Lyft or like Uber. Like obviously the cab drivers are just gonna start murdering and raping everybody, right? Like it's so stupid because they'll do this in the face of like watching these businesses exist, and often in societies that don't have the kinds of regulation that they claim is absolutely necessary. Or the same reason people like don't think that you could have roads, without a government. It's like the road kind of predates that. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science. It's literally a road.
Hello.
So that's my little tangent. Yeah, my tangent. That's my brief sloppy proof of why everybody is actually an ANCAP and.
Uh, so yeah, I wasn't actually interested in talking about the border wall thing anyway. So that's good that I think that you got through it. Tell me.
Yeah,
you got
basically.
Through it? Okay.
just my basic ideas behind it. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's totally true that like you can kind of look at Marxists at
where Alison is finding these people, and I have this feeling that they're putting on an extra big face because they've like heard of her and she's a real person that has she's been in the red pill, and you can find pictures of her, and has a stream with Karen Strawn, and whereas like they get to still sort of, even though I have a fair amount of subs, it's still easy enough for them to categorize me as like just some troll, because outside of the internet, you might as well call that, like, it's like they've really done a good job making sure there's no trace of me besides my YouTube channel.
Well, hey, if you want to try to find some Marxist, I got a Facebook group you can join if you want, just pure on the entire platform. It's called ANCAP versus ANCOM debate group.
Oh, that's funny. Well, okay.
It's horrible.
No, I would hate it. No, but see, because the thing is...
Thanks, I hate it.
No, I don't actually... Okay. What I'm saying is that, it's probably like they're I would just guess, and I can say this confidently without Alison, because she wouldn't probably really know. I'm gonna guess, but I think that they are going to approach the conversation, trying to be persuasive, trying to feel like they're beating this big MRA, somebody. And people just sort of think of me as like, oh, Prince of Queens, that gay anti-SJW, and anti-SJW types are kind of a dime a dozen, and it's like, I do have that stigma, because back when that was the thing that was easy to get lots of views with and most of my views were from that era of content, and now the algorithm is cooked, and I can't really get a whole bunch of views. So if I were to be discussing things as Prince of Queens with one of these people, I don't think that they would really try that hard, but at the same time, I do run across Marxists on Facebook occasionally, or even just like leftists where I just try to say something it's really like I try to be like, yeah, I agree with you. I wonder if maybe you could do this, like making a suggestion on a tactic, and they're like, you're a troll, or something like that. Like in like I posted in a women's group, and I was doing this through another account that I was working on for a while. Like I could log into this fan page, and it was something that was very, very innocuous, like the kind of thing that you would assume was leftist, but was very like spiritual and nice. And I just said something really, really small, and it was very positive. It was like, and it wasn't even like hey, you're doing this wrong. It was just more of a like suggestion, and this woman just like flipped out on me. And that's why I say that my perception of most of the Marxist ANCOM type people, that like I don't even think that they've really given it much thought. Like, I think that mostly it just comes from hatred and anger and racism, but mostly hatred and anger, and they don't really know where to direct it, but they know where all the people that they think are cool are directing it. And I guess I probably talked about that a bunch before, so you don't really need to hear me say that.
Yeah, well, it is kind of like a lot of people, they just follow like emotional cues and signals, and I think that's why a lot of people are very, very defensive when it comes to like having a debate with people. I think that's why you have that phenomenon, right, where when you debate someone and make stative claims at them, it ends up just reinforcing what they think. Mm-hmm. And I like what Alison had mentioned too about that. If you ask a question, it almost there's a reflection, right? It forces them to create a state of claim, which in theory could create a reaction within themselves. Which, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I think that is really the power of a question,
Mm. Yeah.
But of course, my approach is to just take the most extreme stance possible, because then you trick them into, since they're trying to win the debate, right? They're gonna follow you.
Yeah. You
to
force
like
them.
95%.
Yeah. You get some ground on them. You pull them over to your side a bit.
Exactly. You advocate for death camps, and then they'll say, whoa. How about we'll say it should just be illegal and this and this and this? And I'm
rhetorically, that is not what he actually advocates, gods of Facebook. Please don't smite thy channel.
But hypothetically, if I advocate for it literally, then somebody might say, I understand why we might advocate for that rhetorically.
Okay, I
see what I did there.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah,
anyway.
I do, but I don't know how that would ever possibly come up because it's complicated. So, yeah. Okay, you know what? I'm thinking I'm just gonna end this because, like, I need to like get up and walk around and stuff. I'm just feeling uncomfortable in my seat. I need to start doing more exercises because my back hips are starting to get messed up again. So I'm gonna end this, guys. Sorry if this was a little bit of a letdown. It's definitely my fault this time. I will talk to y'all later. Make sure to watch yesterday's video of mine because honestly, I think it was one of my better videos in a long time, and I think I'm definitely getting a algorithmic treatment shaft, or they just hit me with the grand thing that messes up my whole channel. But I got a lot of views on...
I think that you have to upload like daily consistently.
No, but here's the thing. I got this video that I hadn't posted in a really long time and got like 2,000 views, and this one has like, I don't even think broken 500 views. So it's really, there's reasons for all of these things happening. You know what I mean? Like and it's beyond just the like, oh, upload once a day. Like there's other like keywords that you're not supposed to say. They will put on a button and it will be like, boom. Like it's not just to your whole channel. They do it to individual videos. And so yeah, and also, you know, make sure to if you want to send me some money on PayPal or Subscribestar, it would be great. And oh, do you have anything to shill?
Just I've started my streams again, so I'm gonna try to do them around the same time each week. They're show and tell streams, so that means anybody in my Discord, you know, you can post a link in the library, as I've named it, and then yeah, I'll just throw the Hangouts link, be really sloppy with it. Anybody can just hop on, and then, you know, we'll just take turns talking about the stuff we found. And yeah, Esoteric Entity actually had messaged me the other day and expressed interest in being on the stream, so I'm really excited for a chance to have a stream with him and talk to him about stuff, because he's a pretty interesting character, so it'll be fun to pick his brain too.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, and then I forgot. I have those on Thursday my time, which is like Wednesday evening for most people in like America, and like Thursday at midnight for like British people.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we're gonna be signing off. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great